Good evening, everyone. Good evening, ma'am. I wish you all a very happy new year and I hope you all are home and safe. We at Lawyers Club of India have organized and are glad to bring to you a much awaited webinar on IBC and opportunities with solicitor Amrita Kharkar. Good evening, ma'am. Co founder of law firm Kiwi Legal, Amrita ma'am is a practicing advocate who has specialized in the field of insolvency, litigation, real estate, and personal laws. Who better than her to expertly guide us through the web that IBC and opportunities associated with it is? Friends, welcome to the IBC and Opportunities webinar with Amrita ma'am, brought to you by Lawyers Club India, an interactive platform for legal professionals and lawyers of India. Thank you for making time for this, ma'am. We are very happy to have you with us here. Without further ado, I'll let ma'am take over and commence her presentation. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Priyanti. It's a pleasure to be associated here and deliver the opportunities under the IBC code. First of all, Happy New Year to all of you all, and it's hopefully this year should be a fantastic year for all of us, and unlike the 2020, which has just gone by. So today I'm here to explain to you all what are the basic opportunities that this new code has got to us, because it's brought in a lot of new changes to the law. The entire insolvency regime in India has undergone a substantial change. So this being a very nascent law, people are unaware about the various opportunities, because it's actually opened a Pandora's box where a lot of opportunities are available. But these opportunities actually need to reach out to people to understand what exactly can be done with the fact of this enactment of the code. So I'm going to share a presentation here. If just give me a minute. Pariniti, I would expect you to just help me with the screen share, because my option is disabled. Is Piran?
Sure, ma'am. I've let Raghav sir know. He'll give you the access in a moment.
Ma'am, you have the access now.
Thank you. So here we go with our opportunities that are available under the IBC code, the career opportunities that we will now look at. So before I go into what are the opportunities under the IB code, I would like to bring to you all a little background behind the enactment of this code. I would also like to give little information about the code before we actually divulge into what exactly are the opportunities here. So what was the need for the enactment of this code? So prior to the insolvency code, which got enacted in 2016, there was a lot of laws which were there, which dealt with the recovery of debts, which dealt with how the NPAs were to be dealt with. But surprisingly, this particular code has come in and has kind of taken over those laws. Though those laws are still in existence, but primarily this particular code has taken a total different approach towards the insolvent companies. In fact, it is for the betterment and the revival of the companies. So the laws that were existing prior to the enactment of this code were under the Companies Act, under the SARFAESI Act. Then we had the recovery of debts from the banks and institutions, recovery of debts for the banks and institutions. We also had the SICA, which was there for the SIC industrial companies. This was with regards to the corporate regime. And also for the individuals, you had the Provincial Insolvency Act, you had the Presidency Towns Insolvency Act. Now, for the implementation of these acts, you had the different forums. You had the BFIR, you had the DRT, you had the NCLT, the High Court, and the Appellate Tribunal. So since there were a lot of forums, there was not one single consolidated law which could have been approached by the creditors. So creditors had to actually identify which is the forum that I need to go to in order to secure the debt which is due to me. So with the passage of these particular laws came the new law, which is the Insolvency and the Bankruptcy Code. Now, what was the object of this code? Now, we already had certain laws in existence, but we needed a code which will come out with different objects and which was for the betterment also for the creditors and also for the debtors. So what was the object of the code? The basic and the primary object of this code was the revival of the company. So in the event, if a company is unable to pay its debt, does that mean that the company needs to die a silent death? No. There can be a mechanism which can be brought in for the revival of this particular company. So you had something which terms that there were new entrepreneurs that can come in, there were new promoters that can come in, which can take up these companies which are unable to run their businesses. The businesses might be viable, but maybe because of the fail in the management system or due to certain other issues which were prevailing, the company was not doing good. So maybe if a new management comes in, the company might revive itself. So this is a way by which the creditors also are able to secure their debts further. Also, this code saw that these particular laws are enacted, or the way the process of the insolvency has to continue has to be in a time bound manner. It also ensured that there is a balance of interest of all the stakeholders that are involved. It also helped to minimize the role of the adjudicating authority, because prior to the insolvency code, there were different forums which were established to judge about whether the company can pay its debts or whether the company cannot pay its debts. But with this particular act, though there is an adjudicating authority, the role of conducting the entire process does not lie with the adjudicating authority. The role has been now given to an IRP. I will come to those aspects later, but primarily understanding the object of the code is very important, as this is the main reason why this code has been enacted. If you see, there is insolvency laws out of India as well, which have long been entertained and have been in practice. But such kind of a code has now come only into India in 2016. We have similar codes which are in existence prior to this, but outside India. But we definitely needed an insolvency regime in India. Now, the applicability of the code. Now, what is the applicability of the code? Is this code applicable to a particular entity? Is it applicable to individuals? Is it applicable to personal guarantors? So here I've listed out the applicability of the code, where it says it is applicable to the companies, it is applicable to personal guarantors, it is applicable to the limited liability partnerships, it is even applicable to partnerships and proprietary firms which are not registered. It is also applicable to individuals. But one thing that has to be taken into consideration at this particular point is that the provisions of this code have been notified only with regards to the companies and only with regards to personal guarantors and limited liability partnerships. So this code is yet to be applicable to the partnership firms and the proprietary firms and to individuals. So I will not divulge into those parts of the code because they are yet to be notified. I will primarily concentrate on the companies and the LLPs and the personal guarantors. Now, what are the important aspects of these code? Now, there are two basically important aspects of the code. One is insolvency and the other one is the liquidation. So we basically have the first step under the code is that the company undergoes an insolvency process. In the event the insolvency process does not go through, then we have the liquidation process. So I will just briefly get into what is the insolvency process and what is the liquidation process. Because if we don't identify what exactly are these processes, it will be very difficult to identify roles of individuals while acting during the process of insolvency and while acting during the process of a liquidation. So I'm quickly going to take you all through this corporate insolvency resolution process, which is called as a CIRP. Now, this particular process starts for companies and limited liability partnership. Now, what are these processes and how are we to deal with these processes? In order to invoke the insolvency code, you primarily need a debt. A debt, as in there has to be a creditor, there has to be a debtor. Now, in this case, the debtor would be the company. A creditor can be anyone. It can be a company, it can be an individual, it can be any entity, any organization. So, this code categorizes debt into financial debt and operational debt. And It further categorizes based on the debt a financial creditor and an operational creditor. So there are three kinds of people who can invoke this insolvency code. One is the financial creditor, one is the operational creditor, and you have the corporate debtor himself who will invoke the insolvency because the corporate debtor is aware that he is unable to pay the debt, and therefore it would be better that if the company goes under the insolvency process. The moment the company undergoes an insolvency process, there are chances of the revival of the company, because like we have seen, the primary object of the company is that the company needs to be revived, the company needs to stand again and continue as a going concern. So we know what is a debt. A debt is then classified as a financial debt or an operational debt. Financial debts are basically debts by banks and financial institutions. Operational debts are basically for the services which have been rendered but no payment has been done. And based on the debts, you have the creditors, that is a financial creditor and a operational creditor. Now, when we know that there is a debt which is outstanding and that money needs to be recovered, now we cannot use insolvency code as a recovery tool. That has been definitely laid down by the code, not just by the code, but also by various judgments of NCLT or Supreme Court, where they have categorically mentioned that this code cannot be utilized as a code for the purpose of recovery of debts. It is a code only based to revive the companies and continue the business as a going concern. Now, if all the ways of taking out the money from a company have failed and the company is definitely not able to pay its debt, it is only then that the creditor will approach the NCLT. Now, what is NCLT? It is the National Company Law Tribunal, which has been formulated and ready to take up the matters with regards to insolvency code. So an application has to be made by the creditor to the NCLT stating that my this debt is due, and since the company is unable to make the payment, the order be passed for insolvency. At the time when NCLT will pass an order for admission of the application is when your entire process of insolvency starts. Now, when the process of insolvency starts, that is when the application is admitted by NCLT. And that is where also the role of the adjudicating authority, that is NCLT, comes to an end to a certain extent, is when the admission order passes. Now, what happens on this admission order? This is when this date is very important for insolvency code, is because the entire CIRP process commences from this particular date. So you have what happens, you have a moratorium period, that is that the company cannot be proceeded against during this particular period. You have an appointment of an IRP, you have an suspension of the current directors and the promoters of the company. So now we know that the insolvency process has started, is when the admission has commenced. I'm quickly going to just take you through the entire process here. It actually just lays down what happens once the order of admission starts. The first and the foremost thing is that there is an appointment of an interim resolution professional. Now, this entire webinar today, I'm going to revolve around this particular person, that is a resolution professional, that is the insolvency professional, because that is where the entire opportunities under the code have come up, and that is where all lawyers, chartered accountants, the cost accountants come into picture, and is where they can conduct the CIRP process, because like I mentioned, adjudicating authority's role is over, and this is where the IRP comes into picture. So there are various steps under the code which are very technical, which are very time bound in nature, and have to be complied within the timelines which I've mentioned here. So there will be first a public announcement that this company is undergoing an insolvency process. Then there would be an appointment of valuers. Again, a opportunity under the code for valuers to come in and to value the assets of the company, because this liquidation value plays a very important role in determining whether the company will go into liquidation or whether the company will continue as a going concern. Thereafter, the IRP has a lot of other roles, has to constitute a committee of creditors. Then the committee of credit, he is also supposed to prepare the information memorandum. Then they are supposed to pull out all the claims of all the creditors which can come forth. So this particular screen in before you all will give you a rough idea as to how the IRP takes you through the entire CIRP process. Now, what are the roles of an IRP? The day when the IRP gets appointed, the directors of the company stand suspended and the entire management of the company vests with the resolution professional. So, this resolution professional has to play a very important role in managing and conducting the affairs of the company. A lot of duty has been cast on this RP, and therefore it is very essential that this RP maintains very high standards of professionalism, high standards of integrity, high standards of confidentiality and disclosures. Therefore, the RP is required to perform certain obligations, perform certain roles under the code. Now, here I've listed out certain roles of the RP, where the RP is required to prepare an information memorandum, that is information about the company. Now, this particular information is then given out to prospective entrepreneurs who would like to take over the company. So, this information memorandum has to be very important, has to be very necessary. And for this particular reason, the RP has to do a complete due diligence of the company, identify the company, look through the accounts of the company, identify various aspects of the company as to what would have led to the loss of the company. Are there any fraudulent transactions? Are there any preferential transactions? Are there any kind of favors done through the accounts of the company? So all these things, the IRP and the RP. So basically the IRP is the one who becomes the RP, or maybe a new RP is appointed, but the roles remain the same. And the new RP gets appointed after the committee of creditors has been formed. So we have the two nomenclatures, IRP and RP, but primarily the role remains the same. So this particular presentation will give you an idea about the various roles that the RP is required to perform under the Insolvency Code. Now, once the COC is being formed by the IRP, that is the COC is the Committee of Creditors who shall decide the future of the company, because the entire decision making lies with the Committee of Creditors. Okay, so once the Committee of Creditors come into picture, they are the ones who tell the RP as to how the facilitation has to go through with regards to the company. But the RP will be the face for the company, will be the person to whom all the creditors will be answering to their claims, or all the creditors will be filing their claims with the RP. Now, after the entire process has been ready, the information memorandum is gone out to the public, and there are certain people or entrepreneurs who are ready to take over the company. They shall give a plan to this RP. Which plan the RP again plays an important role, shall see that it is for the benefit of the company, it is for the beneficial use of the company. It is also the creditors of the company are definitely taken care of, and then he will lay this plan before the COC. The committee of creditors will go through the plan. If they feel that this plan is viable, they will approve the resolution plan. Once the resolution plan is approved, the RP goes to the NCLT saying that the COC has approved the resolution plan. That means that the company is ready to be revived, and as a result of which an order for revival of the company be passed. That is basically approving the resolution plan. The court, if feels that yes, all the process under the code has been duly followed and that everything has been taken care of under the resolution plan, though the adjudicating authority may not judge the commercial wisdom of the COC, but as far as the stakeholders' interest to best possible extent has been secured, the COC will definitely pass the resolution plan and the company is revived, and definitely the company is not going into liquidation. But in the event the company goes into liquidation, what happens? So here I've laid out an situation where there is a resolution plan. And two aspects, either it is approved by the COC or it is not approved by the COC. In the event if it is approved by the COC, I've explained that the companies will stand revived. In the event it is not approved by the COC, the company goes into liquidation. Now here, this is a very quick process of liquidation which I've put forth before you. Now, what is this particular process that is there? Again, once the adjudicating authority, there will be an appointment of the liquidator. Again, an important role or a duty cast upon the liquidator, which is again an opportunity under the code and very beneficial for the purpose of the chartered accountants or the cost accountants or for the lawyers to take into consideration the appointment of a liquidator by the order of the NCLT. And then again, there is a process which has to be followed and which has been laid down by the code, that there will be invitation of claims, then the claims will be considered, verified, the assets will be then distributed. However, the code, this is very important again, that the code has laid down a procedure where the distribution of assets has to be taken into consideration. There's a waterfall mechanism which the code has laid down, which I'm not going to get into the details right now, but that particular mechanism lays down the priorities in which the assets have distribution proceeds have to be dealt with. So you will first have the financial creditors or the cost of the entire CIRP process. That is the primary uh, cost which has to be first laid out, and then the financial creditors. Then you will have the unsecured creditors. You will then have the employees. So there is a different waterfall mechanism which has to be dealt with. So understanding the two basic aspects under the code, one being the insolvency and the other being the liquidation, we now move on to understand, in light of these two primary objects under the code, that is the insolvency and liquidation, the code has opened up a lot of opportunities for each one of us to come and identify and explore the code. So, in order to understand these particular opportunities and how one can avail these opportunities, we need to identify certain key roles of different authorities laid down in the code. Now, here I'm going to just highlight a few primary authorities which the key roles they have to play and identify under the code. So first and foremost is the IBBI, that is the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India. Now this particular board is a very important board under the code for the only reason that it entirely regulates the CIRP process, it regulates the insolvency professionals, it regulates the laws, the rules, and the regulation framed under the code. So it is very important that we understand the functioning of the IBBI, because the moment you understand the functioning of the IBBI, you will be very clear as to your approach as to what part of this code would you like to explore, would you like to seek an opportunity under. And then we have the adjudicating authority, which we know that is the NCLT, which is already established and is dealing with the matters which are falling under the IBC code. Then another key role is played by the lawyers under the code, which again I'll go on to explain. We have the resolution professional, that is the insolvency professional, which is another very important and a key aspect of the insolvency code, which has brought in a lot of avenues, a change in the entire understanding of the insolvency laws in India. And lastly, we have the liquidator. Now, the Insolvency and the Bankruptcy Board of India. It is a very unique kind of a regulatory body. It regulates the profession also, that is the profession that each individual we would like to seek under the code, as well as the various processes under the code. It enforces the rules for processes. It is the one which also will see that the code is being practiced. It also will see that the rules and regulations are applied properly. It will see that there are a lot of forms which have to be filed with the IBC, and these forms play a very important role because it is one of the key essentials to identify the role of the Insolvency and the Bankruptcy Board. This particular authority has also been designated as an authority for the valuation purposes. Now, valuers also have become a very important role under the Insolvency Code because, like I mentioned earlier, also that the CIRP process, which I just explained very quickly earlier, needs valuers, two registered valuers to be appointed, which will deal with the liquidation value of the company. And this liquidation value plays a very important role from the perspective of accepting a resolution plan, from the perspective of determining whether the company needs to go into liquidation. So it is very important for each one of us to understand these particular aspects. Now, you have laid down a flowchart here basically, which says the roles, the regulatory authorities which this IBBI actually takes into consideration. So, under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board, there is there are different authorities, which I will explain each authority in detail. So you will have one, the insolvency agencies, then you will have the insolvency professionals, and you have the insolvent entity. Insolvent entity means the corporate debtor. You will have the information utilities. I have explained each one in detail as we proceed. So what does the IBBI regulates? Whom all does the IBBI regulate? It regulates the insolvency professionals, it regulates the insolvency agencies, it regulates the insolvency professional entities, it regulates the information utilities and registered valuers primarily. There are many other bodies also it regulates, but I'm primarily going to focus on these particular authorities. So each one I'm explaining in detail in order to for each one of you to understand the importance and how this particular authority we can avail, or we can avail a benefit under these authorities. First is the insolvency professionals. Very important under the code, primarily important under the code because that is where the entire insolvency process or the code revolves. Now, what is this? Who is an insolvency professional? An insolvency professional is a person, an eligible person. Now, when I use the word eligible person, means that he should not be a minor, he should be a resident of India, and that he should be in a sound mind while acting as a resolution professional. So that means that he needs to be an eligible person, and he needs to be enrolled with the insolvency professional agency, and also needs to be registered with the IBBI board. So it is very clear, in order to be an insolvency professional, you need to be registered with two authorities. One is the IBBI itself, and secondly, the insolvency professional agency. So both the registrations are important, and insolvency professional agency is also regulated by the IBBI. So it's not that only with one entity you can register. No, it has to be a registration with both the entities. Then how do I become an IP? The process of becoming an insolvency professional. Now, who is this basically an insolvency professional? Like I mentioned, he is the one who actually drives the company the moment the CIRP process commences. So I've explained you the roles earlier. The resolution professional, the IRP, is the one who manages the entire company because the directors of the company are suspended. The directors no longer take over the company. It is the entire management, how the funds are to be utilized, how the company needs to proceed further during the CIRP process. The entire thing has to be decided by the insolvency professional. So the insolvency professional is the one basically owning the company at that point of time, but not in its actual sense that he is owning the company, but is the one who decides for the company. Therefore, he plays a very important role. So a lot of duties have been cast. There's a code of conduct also which has been laid down for the IP, because like we have seen that a lot of important aspects have been given to the IP. He's also supposed to be a signatory to the checks also, because since the promoters and directors have been suspended, who is the one to take care of the company? So again, The IP then has to be very independent, has to have a lot of integrity, and therefore the IP has been considered very important, and therefore they have laid down a lot of processes or other checks for the IP to become an IP. Now, what are those checks and who can be an IP? So if you're a professional, if you're a chartered accountant or a company secretary or a cost accountant or an advocate with having a 10 years of experience, or graduates having 15 years of managerial experience, then you are expected to pass the limited insolvency examination. This limited insolvency examination has a syllabus which has been laid down, which primarily will take you back to the insolvency code. So you need to know your code very well. You need to know the rules and regulations under the code. So that is very important, the understanding of the code. And since the law is very new, you need to know how we need to proceed under the code. Once you have cleared the LIE, that is a limited insolvency examination, you are supposed to enroll yourself with the insolvency professional agency within 12 months. Once you have registered with them, you have to complete a course which this IPA will offer, that is the Insolvency Professional Agency. It is a pre-registration educational course which has to be completed. And the moment you have completed that course, you have to apply to the board for a registration as an insolvency professional. So the the process is very clear. It has been laid down what exactly has to be followed and how it has to be followed. And then you have another option for young professionals, because there will be people who would not have completed 10 years or 15 years of experience. So there has to be some other way for which this law can be made available to others as well. So for young professionals having less than 10 years of experience, then there is an examination called as a graduate insolvency program. Now, the board has given this authority only to the Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs to conduct an exam called as the Graduate Insolvency Program, that is the GIP, and which particular program has to be conducted, which exam has to be given, then pass the LIE, and then again the same process follows. You have to then enroll with an IPA, that is the Insolvency Professional Agency, and then complete the educational course given by the IPA, and then file for your registration with the IBBI. So I've quickly laid down three basic questions that would generally come to someone's mind. Is that if I'm talking about an insolvency professional, does it have to be only an individual, or it can be some body corporate or a partnership firm? So it has to be an individual only. It can't be any body corporate or a partnership firm. An insolvency professional is an individual. Then there would be questions that are both the exams mandatory? I mean, the examination, that is the LIE, also mandatory, and that the course which the IPA will give, which has to be undertaken, are both of them mandatory? Yes, they both are mandatory. They both have to be complied with. And thirdly, whether a non-resident of India can become an insolvency professional. No, the eligibility criteria is clearly laid down that he has to be a resident of India. But however, there is one point or other provision made under the regulations, that is the insolvency professional entity, the IPE, which I shall deal with in due course. So this particular entity, you can become a partner or a director of such IPE, or become or join an IPE where you can conduct the processes under the code. And what role an IPE plays, I shall explain down the line. So in that case, a non-resident Indian can try definitely, but otherwise he has to be a resident of India. Now, what is the code of conduct? Now, this insolvency professional has to follow a particular code of conduct. This code of conduct needs to be followed for the only reason, like a lot of duties and obligations have been cast on the resolution professionals, and therefore the code of conduct has been brought in place. So primarily it is a huge code of conduct, but I'm just here laying down the primary or the main objects of the code is integrity and objectivity, independence, confidentiality, disclosure. So all these particular points have to be established by the IP. He needs to maintain high levels of integrity, high levels of confidentiality, because CIRP process is something which actually deals with the lives of a lot of people, the company itself, the creditors, the debtors, everybody has to be taken into consideration. So insolvency professional has a lot of duty cast upon it. Now, what are the opportunities when I say for an IP? What all does an IP have to do? It basically has to identify and evaluate the distressed companies for restructuring, developing the strategies to mitigate the risks. So, how they will continue as a going concern, or how it will conduct the business during the CIRP process, a detailed banking financial structures, assessment of the various distressed assets, cash position, or due diligence has to be conducted. So, this insolvency professional, though being an individual, can he alone do this particular act? It is very difficult. The insolvency professional will definitely need to have a team, but the entire authorization, the entire process will go to the insolvency professional only, but definitely the IP can hire its team to take into consideration the various aspects of the company. Now I've dealt with what an IP is, an insolvency professional is. But like I was saying, that they have to register with an IPA, Insolvency Professional Agency, which is a mandatory provision, and with the board. So I will be explaining what an insolvency professional agency is all about. So basically, this is a frontline regulator, and enroll. You have to enroll with this particular IPA. Insolvency Professional Agency has been a very mandatory provision under the code, and IP is expected to register with an IPA. It is only after the registration with this insolvency professional agencies is where you can register with the board. So now what is this IPA, and which are the regulatory authorities the board has authorized to act as an IPA? So there are three basically regulatory authorities which the board has recognized to act as an IPA. One is the Indian Institute of Insolvency Professionals. So this is by the Institute of Chartered Accountants. Then secondly, you have the ICSI, that is the of Insolvency Professionals, which is given by the Institute of Company Secretaries. And third is by the Cost Accountants of India. So these are the only three authorities or the three insolvency professional agencies which are currently in force with whom one has to register. So who can register? Can an advocate, if he is not a chartered accountant, can he register with any of the three entities? Because it does not talk about a lawyer, then that is not the case. These are just IPAs which have been regulated by the board. So definitely a lawyer can register with any of the IPAs. So it need not mean that a chartered accountant has to register only with a chartered accountant insolvency professional agency. It can register with any of the three IPAs. A lawyer can register with any of the IPAs. A graduate of managerial experience can register with any of the three IPAs. So this is very important to identify. We don't know generally how this IPA works or what are those three agencies. So this will actually give you an insight that there are those basically three agencies which have been notified by the regulatory body, that is the IBBI, and they are the chartered accountants, the company secretaries, and the cost accountants institutes, which are the three registered IPAs. Now, like I mentioned, insolvency professional entity. Earlier, also, I've mentioned about what an insolvency professional entity is. So, I'm going to get into the details of this insolvency professional entity. So, this board has actually given a provision under the various regulations to form a IPE. But when I say an IPE, the IP is not an insolvency professional. The IP is not an insolvency professional agency also. So it is basically an institution the concept of IPP is to pull in all their resources, the capabilities in order to help insolvency professionals. Like I said, the work of insolvency professionals is so huge, it is so large that single handedly it becomes very difficult to have dealt with the work of companies having huge turnovers, and as a result of which these IPEs have been recognized for the purpose of helping the insolvency professionals to carry out the entire process smoothly. So again, you need a lot of forensic accounting to be done, a forensic audit, or you can need a stock audit to be done. So the IPs can come into picture and help the insolvency professionals, because these insolvency professionals essentially need to appoint a lot of people while doing their business, which again I'm going to deal with. What are those other people that they have to appoint to conduct the CIRP process in a very smooth and an efficient manner? So these IPEs are neither enrolled as a member of an IPA nor are they registered with the board. They cannot act as IPs under the code, but they can definitely provide support to the IPs. Now, these IPs are generally the directors of the companies. Which companies? The IPE company. So, the company which is registered to act as an IPE, they need to have directors on board who are insolvency professionals who are registered with the IPA and the board. Now, a lawyer. So here's where the lawyers come into picture under the code. So again, like I mentioned, that lawyers play a very substantial role in identifying the various aspects of the code. So till now, we actually have seen that the CIRP process involves a lot of managerial work, a lot of accounting work, but then a lawyer also plays a very substantial role in this particular field. The reason being that the lawyer needs to identify the code, needs to identify the various provisions, because under the code there are a lot of definitions there. There are a lot of obligations cast upon a debtor or a creditor to be followed. So in order to interpret the provisions of the code, in order to interpret the various regulations, a lawyer will be required, because lawyer needs to essentially understand the code. The lawyer needs to identify the various aspects of the code, because if a lawyer, basically a lawyer is the one who has definitely seen how law has been interpreted over the years and can definitely understand the crux of the code and the objects of the code and what exactly the particular provision requires. It also needs to understand the various representations a lawyer can make before the NCLT. Now, like I mentioned, an insolvency professional needs to be appointed under the code, but the insolvency professional may himself appear before the NCLT, but he may also appoint a lawyer to come before NCLT. So, it is very important to understand that firstly, before the NCLT, even a insolvency professional can appear by filing a memorandum of appearance. But at the same time, a lawyer will be required to put forth the arguments, because lawyers have always been in a profession where they have put forth their arguments well. They will be able to identify. So definitely they can help the insolvency professional to identify the law, identify the areas which can be put forth before NCLT if any particular point needs adjudication and needs a clarification. So, a lawyer can represent the insolvency professional, a lawyer can represent the corporate debtor, a lawyer can represent the committee of creditors, or any creditor for that matter. A lawyer can represent any of the debtors if that be the case. So, it is that the lawyer has definitely a very important role to play, because the representation, the number of people involved in the entire CIRP process is quite large, as a result of which a representation might be required and a lawyer will definitely need to come forth. Also, a lawyer can act as an IP, and therefore a lawyer can also take up all the various examinations, follow the due process to become an insolvency professional. So this code has not just brought in the lawyers for the purpose of understanding the law or putting it before the court. It also allows the lawyer to act as an insolvency professional, that is, take into consideration various accounting aspects, the taxations, all those aspects will also be then covered by the lawyer. Now, there's another segment of this code, which is the information utility, which is again one of the bodies formulated and regulated by the board. So, there is only one currently, the information utility, which is in place, that is a National E-Governance Services Limited. So, this is a very concise kind of a utility, information utility, which takes the entire information of the creditors and debtors together. This particular company will assist the insolvency professionals, will assist the NCLTs, the tribunals, basically to identify the various debts that a entity might have. So it's like a database which this particular information utility maintains, and it helps to uh, provide the data in a very time bound manner as and when it is required. So it is very important for the particular information utility to identify the debtors, provide them kind of a resolution if a restructuring can happen, but primarily it is to facilitate all stakeholders of the IBC ecosystem comes into consideration. It is basically an mitigator between a creditor and a debtor. So all information about the entity, if any debtor, if any creditor wants to find out, they can definitely find it out through this information utility. So this is about the information utility under the code. And then there are some other scopes and other roles under the IBC, which are that the IBC provides for different processes which have to be conducted during the CIRP process. Which processes have to be conducted by the resolution professional. Now, resolution professional himself alone cannot do a lot of activities. Therefore, there are many aspects like forensic audit needs to be done, a due diligence needs to be done, or a stock audit has to be done, or you need an internal audit to be done. So this again opens an avenue for a lot of auditors, CAs to take into consideration these particular aspects, that they can assist an insolvency professional in conducting these forensic audits, these due diligences, stock audits. So that plays an important role. Then there is another important aspect, which is the monitoring agency. So under the resolution plan, which I mentioned earlier, that a resolution plan, which is a revival of the company, they have to form a monitoring agency. Which monitoring agency has to ensure that the plan is being applied, the plan is being put forth, the plan is being used the way it has been proposed to be used. So they need to establish a monitoring agency till the company again stands back on its feet. So this monitoring agency also comes into picture. So again, it enhances the scope. It opens up a lot of avenues, opportunities for individuals to come forward and provide managerial skills and a monitoring system or a supervision system to ensure that the plan is being acted upon by the new promoter or the new entrepreneur that comes into picture. So these are various roles which can be identified under the code and has opened up a lot of avenues for many people. Then there's another aspect, which is the registered valuers. Now, a insolvency professional requires registered valuers because it has to get the valuation of the company done by two registered valuers. So it is very important again that the valuers have to come into place. Again, like I've earlier mentioned, the IBBI is one of the authorities for the uh, regulation of the valuers. So again, we can have a lot of valuers coming into picture. So again, we have the cost management people who can come into picture. We have the chartered accountants for the valuers. Now again, valuation can be of three types. Valuation basically is of the land and the building, or you can have valuation of the plant and the machinery, or of the shares, which is in form the investment. So all these kind of aspects again have opened a lot of opportunities for valuers, and again they have to be registered with the IBBI. So again, there is a mandate, there is a process by which the registration happens. So like I said, the insolvency code has definitely opened up a lot of opportunities for many, in primarily for the lawyers, primarily for the chartered accountants, the company secretaries, and for the cost accountants. Now, why is it important to understand this code, and who will basically benefit by understanding this particular code? So it is very important to understand this code because there are a lot of aspects involved, which I've already discussed. The various aspects like who is an insolvency professional and how his role has to be completed under the code. We have a liquidator under the code. A liquidator also has to perform certain objects, has to perform certain roles under the code. So many opportunities have been put forth. So it is very important to identify the code. But then, in order to avail these opportunities, one needs to know and understand the code. It is not just that, okay, I know that there is an opportunity under the code, but then I need to understand what that opportunity is all about. So it is very important to interpret the code, understand the provisions thereunder, understand the regulations. So one needs to definitely go through a very important aspect of the code. Even like if you see the way the mandates have been laid down, that how an examination has to be given, so those examinations also require you to have a very thorough understanding of the insolvency code, a very thorough knowledge of the rules and regulations made there under. So every person who would like to secure an opportunity under the code needs to first know the code, understand the object of the code. So this plays a very primary role before any person decides on an opportunity under the code. And who are going to benefit under this code? So primarily the lawyers, the chartered accountants, company secretaries, insolvency professionals, cost accountants, students basically will definitely benefit under an insolvency code, because this is a totally new avenue they can explore. Many law firms have come up with a different cell in their firm which only deals with insolvency matters. So it is very good for students to identify that yes, they need to pursue and understand this code. It is only then that they will be able to take up jobs, opportunities with law firms, and identify the various aspects of the code. So it will definitely give them a thorough understanding. Then also bankers and NBFCs need to identify the code, understand the code, because a lot of duties have also been cast on the creditors. Now bankers and NBFCs are definitely creditors to many debtors. So to reduce the NPAs, or in the event if a company is going to undergo an insolvency, then what does the law say? How is my debt going to be repaid to me? So these bankers basically need to understand the code. It is very important for them to understand how this process is going to be conducted. NBFCs need to identify how their processes are going to be conducted. So it plays a very important role to identify the code. So before any understanding an opportunity, one needs to know the code. So by this, I have actually given you insight of the entire opportunities and the benefits one would get under the code, and given you a slight idea as to each individual role that a chartered accountant, lawyers, students, company secretaries can play. Therefore, it is very important that one interprets, studies, understands the code. Because if you see, there are a lot of it is not just about understanding the code by reading the code, but since the law being in its nascent stage, there are a lot of enactments are happening in terms of NCLT orders, NCLAT orders. You have the Supreme Court giving orders on various aspects of the provisions of the code, so which need to be studied, which need to be analyzed. And this code is also undergoing a lot of amendments, which you've also seen in the light of this COVID-19 situation, that the limit of invoking the code has been increased from 1 lakh to 1 crore. Then why such an amendment? There has been suspension of section 7, 8, and 7 and 10 of the code, section 7, 9, and 10 of the code. So one needs to identify why such suspensions, the analysis. So it's very important for each one of us to identify basically what this code is trying to bring about, a change in our entire insolvency regime in India. With this, I hope I would be quite informative about each one of you to understand and identify what opportunities one could have sought under the code.
Thank you for that splendid presentation, ma'am. And would you be open to taking some questions now?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So the first question we have is, if you are an IP from India, can you practice in other countries? And if yes, are there any limitations one should be aware of?
Okay. So if you are an IP in India, you would definitely not be able to practice in the other countries. So the only reason that the insolvency law regimes in other countries are very different. But I would say in US or UK, the insolvency regime was already established, unlike India, which is come in 2016, which runs quite similar, though not in totality. But yes, one will definitely not be able to practice because we don't have any cross-border treaties with them with regards to insolvency. So one would then have to adopt the model insolvency professional regime, which is there in place. But then the countries need to adopt that, and maybe based on that, there would be some regime which might come down the line where insolvency professionals will be able to practice. But as on date, definitely they will not be able.
Okay, ma'am, thank you for that answer. And another question that we have here is about cross-border insolvency, as in what it is.
So cross-border insolvency, now see, there are a lot of judgments we are currently facing. If you would see the Vidocon case or the Jet Airways case, where we have seen a lot of cross-border issues where there are assets outside India and the insolvency is going in India, or there would be issues there. So there is basically no particular law in this area. So we have to go to the particular tribunal, the NCLT, to seek for a specific direction in order to implement the cross-border insolvencies. Otherwise, if you go to see that if you want to automatically invoke anything that take into consideration the assets of an entity outside India who's undergoing insolvency in India, then you have to seek special permissions of the court. But there would be currently no law here to establish that. It will have to be through precedents and judgments of the court, which we have to follow, like how we have it in Jet Airways or Videocon.
So the field of insolvency and bankruptcy is fresh and full of opportunities for us to exploit, I guess.
Yes, totally.
So thank you for that splendid and thorough presentation, ma'am. With everything that you have talked to us about, I'm confident that the field of IBC seems even more welcoming than it did before. Participants, please feel free to reach out to us at Lawyers Club of India for any further queries. Our forum section, wherein the legal experts address the queries and give legal advice, is a popular highlight of the work that we do. To add a feather to this hat that we adorn after our webinar today, a masterclass on Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code is going to be organized on 23rd January and conducted by ma'am herself, for which you can register yourselves now at Lawyers Club of India. Please head to the chat box to find helpful links, and do head to our website to get the exclusive details. With this, I thank ma'am one more time for an insightful webinar. Thank you so much, ma'am. Lawyers Club India wishes you all a very happy and safe new year. Thank you all and have a good evening.